Demonstrators in the Khan Yunis refugee camp and other locations in the Strip rallied against Gaza's frequent power outages, food shortages, and generally tough living conditions until Hamas security forces broke up the protests, reportedly seizing cell phones and making arrests. Now, there was also continuing internal Palestinian clashes of a more seriously violent nature in Lebanon's Ain el-Hilwa camp between forces linked to the mainstream Fatah movement and those belonging to radical Islamic groups. This fighting erupted this weekend after a Fatah security officer was shot and killed by Islamist militants. The death toll in those clashes today rose to at least 8. First of all, Hamda, Gaza, we've seen this before, but how much of a real challenge does this pose to Hamas's control of the Gaza Strip, this kind of popular unrest?
Calev, good evening. Great to be with you. This protest in particular, I talked to sources last night about it. They said it was a little bit on the smaller side. While it was hundreds, perhaps thousands of Gazans taking to the street, voicing frustration about the lack of energy, the lack of electricity, the lack of gas. All of this stemmed from a municipality dispute between the people and the Khan Yunis municipality last Thursday, where there was a technical error on their part that resulted in a wall falling over and killing a man in a building, a structure that they were building. So that led to a series of disputes saying that the living conditions are not working. And you have to remember who the rulers of the Gaza Strip are, Hamas. So it turned into a demonstration to voice their rejection of the horrible living conditions that they're under. At the same time, there was a pro-Hamas demonstration that was in favor of the movement, that was chanting for the movement because they were in Cairo seeking some reconciliation with other Palestinian factions. Now, there were a little bit of clashes with protesters and counter-demonstrators. There were pro-Hamas demonstrators throwing some rocks at the demonstrators who were chanting that they wanted better living conditions. But overall, this was a little bit of a smaller situation. The sources that I talked to said that these people are likely not to get into any sort of trouble. Remember, Hamas does not allow any sort of dissidence to happen against them. They don't allow protests to happen against them, against their leadership. So a little bit of a smaller situation, really voicing frustrations about the living conditions in Gaza.
Right, and let's turn to Lebanon. They're a little more serious because there have been fatalities in that fighting between Fatah and these Islamist groups. Ariel, how serious is that situation?
Well, 8 deaths is indeed a serious situation, but it isn't rare. I mean, the Ain el-Hilwa refugee camp in the city of Sidon in southern Lebanon, the biggest refugee camp, Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon, housed almost 50,000 Palestinians. It has known its street clashes between the different factions, mainly the Fatah faction and Islamist groups. Now, this started over the weekend with an attempt to avenge the death of a Fatah member. The revenge plot was unsuccessful against the Islamist militants, and that created a cascade of reprisal attacks in which the commander of the Fatah forces, Fatah security forces in the Ain el-Hilwa camp died along with a few of his aides. Now, it's important to note that according to Lebanese law, the military has no jurisdiction there. The factions themselves are in charge of running law and order, and as often happens, it's the absence of those two that erupt. Now, there's reports in Palestinian media that Majid Faraj, the head of Palestinian intelligence, is on his way to Lebanon. Now, obviously, they're trying to, as hard as they can, to disconnect the visit from the ongoing fighting there, despite a ceasefire agreement. But indeed, this is another flare-up in a violent dynamic, one can say, in this refugee camp. Unfortunately, this is just the latest in series of different clashes, and so far there appears to be no end in sight.
All right, we'll have to see how it develops there. Stay with us because you mentioned it, Hamda. While Palestinians are fighting among themselves elsewhere, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas and other Fatah leaders wrapped up talks in Cairo last night with top Hamas officials in an effort to repair the now 17-year-long rift between the two top Palestinian groups. No concrete results other than forming a, quote, reconciliation committee to continue the dialogue. Here's what Abbas had to say in Cairo.
I call on you to form a committee among yourselves to continue the dialogue on different issues which were discussed today in order to end the division and to achieve national unity. I ask this committee to immediately start working in order to finish its mission and get back to us with agreements or recommendations.
Ariel, forming a committee is usually a sign of really a sort of a deadlock. It's just an easy way to come up with things. Any progress really here?
Well, the committee hasn't even been formed.
Okay,
I mean, in his
talk about forming a committee.
Talk about a deadlock. In his closing remarks, the Palestinian president called for the immediate establishment of said committee. That has not happened yet. And also, interestingly, there wasn't a joint statement at the end of this meeting in Cairo, and that shows the absence of agreement, which is basically the goal of this meeting. This followed a similar attempt for reconciliation in Algeria just in last October that called for the establishment of free elections for the presidency, for parliament. Nothing of that has happened, so there's no cause to believe that anything will change following this meeting in Cairo.
Hamda, what about Palestinians? Do they want to see Hamas? Is there popular support for some kind of unity government, given the differences between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip?
There are mixed reviews among the Palestinians. You have, on one hand, the people that are totally against a two-state solution and want to see a Palestinian state from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. That's Hamas. Then you have Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, who are pro a two-state solution, who are willing to work with perhaps the Israelis, to work with other bodies. So there are these huge differences between them. However, they do have one common thing, which is Israel, and the fact of their rejection of the occupation. They have this combined consensus on what it is they're fighting. So a lot of Palestinians do want them to come to the table to reach some sort of unified idea on what it is they want to do together, even if the political differences outlying them are a little different now. Perhaps they could come to a table and, like they did in Cairo, and discuss for the first time among them all these factions.
But I will say that just maybe an achievement, the fact that Mahmoud Abbas did meet with Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader, have face-to-face. I don't even remember the last time that they even had that done.
I'll tell you the last time they had that talk. It was in Turkey last week. Prior to that, it was in Algeria. But then before that, it was 5 years ago.
Okay, so basically 5 years before this
exactly.
current round.
So this was a true willingness from both sides. Hamas officials said that they were rooting for the success of this meeting, that they were willing to come to an understanding with their Palestinian brothers to fight the common enemy. So, look, nothing really concrete came out of this, but coming to the table themselves as a Palestinian group with all of these different factions is an accomplishment in and of itself. Remember, there were three factions that weren't present there,
right.
One of them being Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who holds a lot of stake with the Palestinian people. So we'll have to see what happens, how this develops, if anything concrete will come at all.
I'll just say one motivating factor there, the agreement to mine that natural gas off the coast of Gaza, basically territory that Hamas is closer to, but the Palestinian Authority, Fatah, is supposedly supposed to manage, and that could be one of the factors pushing them. Ariel Osser and Hamda Salhout, thank you for joining us. And if you want more great content like that from I-24 News, just hit the subscribe button. It's as easy as that.